It's Wednesday morning, day 3 in our schedule. It is 9 o'clock and time to get started. First, we're going to go over some homework last night, and then we're going to do chapters 5, 6, and 7 today. So, I'm going to go over the homework first from last night after a few announcements. So, here's the announcements first. If you're starting with us today, welcome to class. My name is Tim Jensen, your instructor. There is no recording of any classroom at all. You cannot video or audio record these sessions by order of the New Jersey Real Estate Commission. So please, voluntarily comply. Also, no posting of any links in the chat room. We've had problems in the past from people posting things that do bad things to our system. So we don't need to have any of that anymore. So please, no posting of any links in the chat room. When discussing, please, guys, let's refrain from using foul language. That's not necessary. If you're having connection issues, a couple things you can do. Number one, close all the programs, all the apps that you have running in the background, because this program is an audio and visual component and demands a lot of bandwidth. And if you're running other things, it could mess it up. If you're still having trouble, you can always hit the refresh button. It's a little semicircle with an arrow on it up by your address bar on top of your screen. That will reestablish the connection, and all you have to do is log back in. Doesn't matter if you only miss a minute or two, having to log back in is when you miss more than half an hour becomes a problem. Also, if you have administrative questions, where do I find this? How do I get that? Where's my this? Where's my that? How do I know about this or that? You can always go to recareercenter.com and find any information or resource that you want. Or you can wait until noon when one of our assistants, our administrative assistants, either Lauren or Noel, will come online and discuss any questions you may have. I will caution you guys, you're only here for about 15 minutes. So don't walk away, come back 15 minutes later expecting to ask questions. They probably already answered them 1 or 2 times, and now they're on a lunch break. So if you have questions, stay right after 12 o'clock, they'll answer them. Also, if you have any other questions about real estate that are not pertinent to the topics being discussed or administrative questions, I always stick around after class to find any or answer any questions you may have. And I always provide my email address at the end of the day if you need to reach out and contact me. Also, we have 3 normal breaks during the day. We have a half-hour break at 10:30, an hour break at noon, and a half-hour break at 2:30. And as always, I ask, please pre-read the chapters before you come to school. It makes for a much better discussion, much higher level of comprehension and retention on your part, and you do better on the exam because of it. If you don't pre-read the chapters, then when I start discussing these things, you're hearing them for the first time, and you may have questions that actually are very self-evident or already answered in the text. So please, guys, let's do the right thing. Pre-read the chapters, study the material before you come. Ask questions pertinent to discussion. We'll answer them right away. But if you have other questions, wait till the end of the day. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. So before I start, was there anyone with any issue or question before we get moving today? Not seeing any typing, so I'm going to moderate the conversation, and we're going to go through the homework, chapters 1 through 4. Since you had trouble downloading them yesterday, I might as well give you all the answers for chapters 1 through 4. So, for chapter 1, the homework answers are as follows. Number 1 was D for dog. 2, C. 3, B as in boy. 4, B as in boy. 5A. 6, B as in boy. 7, D for dog. 8, D for dog. 9, C. And 10A. For chapter 2, the answers to the homework questions are as follows. Number 1A, Number 2, D as in dog. Number 3, B for boy. 4 was C. 5 was B for boy. 6A. 7, D as in dog. 8, D as in dog. 9, B for boy. And 10, D as in dog. For chapter 3, the homework answers are number 1, B for boy. Number 2, C. Number 3, A. Number 4, B for boy. Number 5, A. Number 6, D as in dog. 7 was C. 8 was D for dog. 9 was C. And 10 was D as in dog. For chapter 4, the homework answers are as follows. Number 1 is D for dog. 2, A. 3, C. 4, B as in boy. 5, A. 6, B for boy. 7, C. 8, D as in dog. 9, A. And 10, A. So, was there any questions about the homework answers? Raju, you had a question. What is it? And Mark, you have questions. Can you review chapter 1, question 5? Chapter 1, question 5 was A. One day verse, I'm gonna have to look up the question. Let's see, chapter 1, which one was it? Question 5. A rental referral agency advertises the availability of an apartment. How often must they check the availability of the unit? If it's a specific apartment, it's every day. If it's not specific, it's every 3 days. And that was from the lecture from yesterday. Let's see what else. I had trouble downloading. Okay, so chapter 1, number 9, doesn't the licensee void after 2 cycles? Chapter 1, a failure to renew will void a license after C. If you miss a renewal date of July 1st for 1 year, then 2 years from that, if you miss a renewal, then your license is forfeit. Tim, you keep cutting out. Well, then reset your connection, Janet. Chapter 4, number 2. Let's see. Chapter 4, number 2. The agency responsible for the enforcement of the Fair Housing Act is the, couldn't also be Department of Justice, as fair housing was handled over to both agencies. It's the Department of Housing and Urban Development is where you file the claim and the issue starts. So, sorry, an emergency came up. I'll have to log in later to make up today. Okay, do what you got to do. Mark, all you have to do is click the page and it will open. Okay, gotcha. Can you please type all the answers in the chat? No. Sorry, I'm having audio. Okay, quick question. These aren't the same as quizzes after each unit? No, those are chapter review tests after each chapter, and those are in the book. These homework questions are assigned daily, and they're not in the book. Quiz 3, number 2. Why D and not B? Which of the following will not terminate an agency relationship? Reciprocity has nothing to do with agency. Therefore, chapter 3, question number 2. If I'm reading the answer is C. Reciprocity. 3, number 2. Yeah, answer C. 3, number 10. The broker is a broker of a buyer should do which of the following? And 310. Advise the buyer if the listing is price of the sales house is unrealistic. Yep. That would be the answer. Try the homework page on another browser if, okay. Okay, let's see. Anybody else? Not seeing any other questions. Hang on a sec. Chapter 4, number 9. All right. Chapter 4, number 9 was A. All right. So if you missed all the answers to the readout of the answers, guys, they're always located on the same page as where you found homework. So you can always get the answers to the homework right then and there. All right. So was there any other questions before we move on? And I'm going to assume there are no questions, and I'll moderate the conversation and start the discussion of chapter 5, 6, and 7 today. So it's got a lot, we got a lot to cover, guys. So let's get busy. What is real estate? Chapter 5. So when you have completed this chapter, you should be able to identify the characteristics of real estate and be able to distinguish between the characteristics of personal property and fixtures. So the begging question is, what is real estate? Real estate starts with a bundle of rights. As an owner of real estate, you get the rights of possession, the right to use the property for any legal purpose. You have the right to what's called quiet enjoyment, meaning if you have paperwork proving that you own the property, no one should be bothering you about ownership of your property. And you can always produce that paperwork to prove it. You have the right of exclusion. You can say, hey, no trespassing. You can paint purple lines around your property that's the internationally recognized sign of no trespassing. So when you put that up, people know they can't go on your property. You have the right to tell people you can't come on my yard. And you have the right to dispossess or alienate the property. Dispossess, what does that mean? Give it away, gift it. You can lease the property. You can alienate, you can sell the property, you can will it, you can do many things with your property because it's yours and you have these rights that you can do these things with. So are there any questions about, first of all, the rights that you get as an owner of real property? Not seeing any questions. Let's move on. All right, now, besides the rights of ownership, you get land. Give me land, lots of land. What's the land? The land is the Earth's surface. Well, how deep does the Earth's surface go that I own this land on? Well, in New Jersey, and we're only talking about New Jersey, a landowner, person who owns real estate, owns down to the center of the earth from the borders of their property on the top of the land. That's right. Everything under the ground is that owner's property. That means there's subsurface rights. Whatever's under the ground belongs to them. Minerals, gas, oil, water, whatever's in the ground is yours. Whatever sits on the ground, water, you have water rights to water sitting on your ground. You have all the trees and shrubs and rocks and dirt and all that stuff comes with the ground. It's part of the real property. You own it. And your rights extend upwards, called air rights. And in New Jersey, the meaning of an air right extends into infinity, meaning you don't have any limit to your rights of air protection. However, I'm going to stress this very importantly. You're not going to be able to call up the NASA and say, you know what, I don't want that space station flying over my house. Good luck with that one. What about these low-flying aircraft? Well, there are rules that the FAA imposes on aircraft that says you cannot fly below a certain level, or ceiling they call it, above residential homes. And I believe that ceiling in residential properties is a minimum of 500 feet for light aircraft, and I think it's 1,000 feet or more for heavy aircraft, but it depends on where you are. If you're near an airport, then guess what? Those planes fly in and out into that airport over your house, but you do have air rights. So if you don't like the amount of air traffic over your house, like the residents of Rockaway, New York did, they organized and approached the Port Authority because Rockaway was experiencing daily air traffic without ceasing. Day and night, every minute, jets flying in over the house, landing and taking off over from JFK Airport. So they petitioned the Port Authority to cease that. What the Port Authority did was create an alternating or vectoring approach routes and departure routes for aircraft so that it gave Rockaway a few days rest every week. You do have air rights to the extent that you can protect what happens over top of your ground, but it's limited. It is somewhat limited. You can't tell commercial aircraft you can't fly over my house. But that neighbor's tree with the limb hanging over your property, and you know in the next big snowstorm, that thing's going to snap off and smash your house. You have the right to protect your property from an encroachment from your neighbor's yard. So you can ask your neighbor, please cut that limb off before it smashes my house. And if he refuses, you have the right to cut that limb off. But you don't have the right to kill his tree, so you have to be very careful. You can exercise your air rights, water rights, subsurface rights at any time you wish. They belong to you. It's part of the land you bought. You own it. What else comes with the land and these rights? Well, any man-made improvements on the property come with the real estate. Any man-made permanent attachments to the real estate are part of the real estate. The house, the driveway, the deck, the pool in the ground. I don't know, maybe you got some other things going on, walkways, who knows? Maybe a big patio out back. If those are man-made items and installed on that property, they became part of the property when they were adapted for special use and permanently attached into the ground for some reason. Those are all part of real estate. So before I go any further, does anybody have any questions about what is real estate? A couple people got some typing bars open, so I'll wait. How about shed above ground? Depends on how it's attached to the ground. Is it permanent with footings, dug into the ground and cemented into a foundation? Part of the real estate. But if it's on cinder blocks sitting on top of the ground, movable, personal property. Do rights include the collection of rainwater? We're going to talk about that, Alexander, but good question. Is above ground pool personal property, not real estate? Yes, it is movable. You can relocate it very easily. I'm confused about air rights and when you can do something about it and when you can't, such as you said with Rockaway. What's confusing you, Laura? Let me get back to Alexander's question first. If you could clarify that, Laura, and tell me what it is you're afraid of, I'll try to answer it. Do water rights include the collection of rainwater? Well, unfortunately, in New Jersey, you're not allowed to harvest rainwater. I lived in Massachusetts for 15 years before I moved back to New Jersey. I'm originally a Jersey citizen, went to college in Boston, stayed there. Then I came back from a job issue and all that other good stuff. But when I lived in Massachusetts, we had rain barrels attached to the downspouts of our gutters. And we had little screens and filters on them, and we had an ever-ending supply of fresh water we could use for flowers, gardens, and all kinds of things. In New Jersey, they don't want you to do that. That's public right, the water that falls in your ground. In fact, a year ago, New Jersey created a brand new property tax called the rain tax, that if it rains, they calculate how much rain fell on your property, how much non-permeable surface you have on your property to calculate how much of the public's water rained on your land, and they tax you for it, believe it or not. Yes, we live in Jersey, baby. Welcome to tax land. So let's see, Laura, I thought you can't really do anything about it. Then why were the residents of Rockland able to do something? They grouped together and a very loud voice protested. They said, give us a break. And the airport said, you know what, you're right. We've been abusing this privilege of taking over your property every day and every night, and it's insane. So they said, okay, sure. And they gave him a break. All right. Wow, that is insane. Many other states have that rain tax. New Jersey's the only one I know of, Kira, or Kyle, or whoever has. Kira, you guess the question. When you buy real estate, will there be documents of past permits that were allowed or not allowed of what you can do with the property? No. So rain is public property in New Jersey, Gary? Yes, it is. Believe it or not. Yes, we live in the land of the free so long as you pay your taxes. Next year, they're going to institute an air tax. So if you breathe, you're going to get taxed. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yes, we can't collect it, but we do get taxed on it. Correct. Yes, I remember, Yenny. I remember that clear as day. This is wild. Cobblestone driveways are property? Yes. Okay, a couple more questions before we need to continue. Does a pool become real property after it's been installed? If it's an in-ground pool, it is permanent and it stays with the property and becomes part of the real estate. If it's an above-ground pool, it is personal property because it can be easily removed. So there's differentiation there. Jason and Mark, you guys have questions and I'll answer those, and then you do need to move on. Or not. I'm not sure if anybody's got a question or not. What about the trees that are curbside? Well, it depends how far off the curb they are. If they're within 10 feet of the street, they belong to the town. We're going to talk about that in another chapter, but I'll just answer that question. Okay. Not seeing any more questions. I'm going to moderate the conversation and move on. All right, good questions. So you own land, everything on it, any man-made improvements, plus all the natural attachments, the trees, the rocks, etc., down to the center of the earth and up to infinity. You have all the rights of ownership. So that's what you get when you own real property. Now, let's talk about these water rights, because people want to know, hey, I want to be in the know. I want to know about water rights. Let's talk about that. Well, first of all, let me ask you a question. I'm going to open it up for a real quick response. Is a mobile home parked on a piece of property part of the real property, or is it not part of the real property? Mobile home. Gary, no. Everybody's very convinced of that. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I'm going to have to interject here and say it depends. What? It's a mobile home. However, there are some mobile homes that have been taken off their wheels and put right on concrete foundations attached to the ground. In that case, at that moment, it's part of the real property. But if it's on wheels and easily hooked up to a trailer and moved, then it's personal property. So it depends on, are the wheels on or off? Is it attached to a foundation? If so, part of the real property. If not, personal property. It's on wheels, can be easily moved. So understand, guys, there are situations where one could be one could be the other. So there's got to be tests to determine what's what. And we'll talk about that at the end of this chapter. So I will address that. So just hang on, guys. We got a rough and bumpy ride ahead of us we got to get through. So now, water rights. I'm sorry, there seems to be a whole bunch of people trying to ask questions. What's up? Dennis, you had a question, and Joe, you have questions. Are modular shipping container homes real estate? Depends on how they're attached to the ground. Okay, guys, just remember, if your dialogue bar is open, it looks to me like you're asking a question. So If you're resting your mouse on it, it looks like you're asking a question. That's why I stopped class and asked. That's why. Was there any other questions before I move on? What about the house and communities? Is the Ruckle same? What? What about the house in communities? Is the Ruckle? I'm sorry, Talika, I don't know what you're at. The rule? What rule are you replying to? And what? And how about a house in a community? What does that mean? I don't understand the premise of the question, Talika. Okay, I don't understand partial statements as questions. I'm sorry. You're going to have to phrase a question for me to understand. Yes. Senior housing in communities. What do you mean, Nicole? Is there a question there? I'm sorry, guys. I don't respond well to partial thoughts jotted down as questions. I need a complete question to answer. I'm sorry. I have a tough time reading minds from so far away. We're going to get to that at the end of the chapter, Caitlin. So please, yes, we will discuss the qualification test to determine what's real property and what's not. What's the name of this chapter? Chapter 3 is what is real estate? I'm sorry, Angel. Did you come in late and not know where we are or what day it is? Got to look at the schedule. All right, guys, chapter 5. Let's move on. So water rights. What happens if you own property that abuts a body of water? Do you own the water? Do you only own to the edge of the water? Well, it depends. First of all, when your property or a piece of property abuts a body of water, the catch-all phrase is called riparian rights. Some properties abutting a river, a stream, a lake are called riparian properties because their border is the water. Now, the riparian rights extend to all pieces of property that are sitting next to or edge on waterways or bodies of water. There is a subsection to riparian rights called littoral rights. Littoral rights are for those properties that are abutting or next to navigable waterways, meaning you can drive ships up and down next to the land, and or tidally influenced properties like oceanfront beach houses. There's a high tide and a low tide. That's a tidally influenced body of water. Those properties are called littoral properties. But again, the catch-all phrase for all properties abutting waterways are called riparian. And if it's on a tidally influenced or navigable body of water, then it's a littoral property. Now, gaining land through the water action does occur. Losing land as the action of water does occur. First of all, let's take losing property. As you know, there's a natural force called erosion that occurs. In this case, when water abuts a piece of property, the action of the water constantly going by the property tends to erode material from the bank. If you're on the elbow, the outside elbow of a river, there's constant wearing away, scouring of that body, that piece of property that abuts it, because the river runs very quickly by that part. But on the inside elbow of the property, the water runs very slow, and sometimes stuff gets deposited on the land. Whether it's elbows or lakefront or whatever, if you lose property due to the action of the water, it's called erosion. That's a simple statement. If you gain land from the action of water, it's called accretion. If you think of a credit, meaning you get something, then accretion means a gradual buildup of material onto your property. So you can gain land through accretion and increase your border of your property, but you may lose land through erosion, and then you'd have a smaller lot as a result. The material being eroded or accreted is called alluvion. An alluvial action is one that moves material. So the material being deposited through accretion on a piece of property is called alluvium. The stuff being eroded away through erosion is called alluvion. Two more terms you have to remember. This one's a little more difficult. Reliction. Reliction is a term that refers to the gradual pulling away of the surface of the water from a piece of property, thereby exposing more ground. How does that occur? Natural forces. I know that right now one side of Yellowstone Lake is rising, therefore the water is starting to pull away from one side and start encroaching into the area opposite that, where the lake borders the ground on the other side. That's a natural force could occur. Or let's say you live in a lake community and the Lake Association has decided that the dam holding all that water in the lake is not worth all the money, all the aggravation of the EPA requirements and inspection and maintenance criteria. It's a very, very, very expensive proposition to operate these things. So they say it's not worth it. So they abandon the dam and the water starts to flow out of the lake permanently, therefore exposing more land from each property that's abutting the lake. If that land is community owned, then it's a common element that everybody shares in and you don't gain the area. However, if it is not commonly owned and is just a natural resource, then you gain the land as the water recedes. That's called reliction. And the last term I'm going to talk about, or actually two last terms, one is avulsion. Avulsion is a sudden action that causes a change to the border of your property. Well, what could be avulsion? An earthquake, a sudden deluge flood can change borders of properties. A sudden change to the border of your property, whether it's positive or negative, is called avulsion. An avulsive action where the border of your property suddenly changed because of a natural occurrence. And then there's something called a front foot. Understand, guys, when you live on any piece of property that abuts a street, typically the street is known as the frontage. The property that abuts the street is called the frontage. And the distance from side yard to side yard across the street is called the front feet of the property. And when you hear land descriptions like it's 200 by 220, the first number that is read is the frontage of the lot, 200 feet from side yard to side yard across the street. However, if your house or your lot of property abuts a waterway, then the waterway is where the front foot would be recorded. Each foot is a front foot. So in the case where I described the 200 by 220 lot, the 200 feet is the 200 front feet of the property, or its frontage, 200 feet. If it's on a waterway and it was 200 by 220, then the 200 would be across the water bodies from side yard to side yard. So those are the definitions you have to understand for water rights. Now let's put it in context. What do I need to know about water rights for? Because especially here in New Jersey, there's many properties that abut waterways. We have a lot of lake communities, a lot of properties that live on rivers, streams. There's a lot of properties that abut the intercoastal waterway, rivers, the ocean, or oceanfront properties. Those are all properties that have littoral and riparian rights. So if you're going to buy a beach house down at LBI and it's oceanfront, you're buying a littoral property. Now here's the question. If under riparian rights, you own the water to the center of the stream if it's a small stream, then how far into the ocean do you own when you have littoral rights? Well, you don't. See, in littoral rights, you can't own the ocean. Nope. However, where then do you own to? And everybody says, well, where the water ends. Good answer. But my question then would be, at what time of day? Because remember, during a given day, there's low tides and high tides. The answer to the question on littoral property is your property ends at the average high tide mark. That's where your property ends. And below that mark, that's called public right-of-way access. Anybody in the world can stroll up and down the beach at low tide. But at high tide, when the water's lapping your side fences, people can't like jump your fence, walk your property and jump the other fence to get across and don't want to get wet. Can't do that. They're trespassing. So your property rights on a littoral property end at the average high tide mark of that area. In a riparian right, if your property abuts a river, a stream, a lake, well, it can differ. If it's commonly held property like a lake association, then you don't own anything in the water. Your property ends at the water edge. If you live on a small stream that's not a big one, it's only a couple feet across, you own to the middle of the stream, and the water that flows across your property is yours to use. But you cannot rob the downstream neighbor from his use of the water, or the guy across the way, so you can't block the stream, can't dam it up. You can put a water wheel in there if you want, generate some electricity or a pump situation. You can access some of that water to use for watering your garden or something, but you can't take it all. It's not all yours. You just own the property underneath the water and any water flowing across it. Now, what about a large river or stream? Well, I live in Oakland, New Jersey. We have the Ramapo River. Now, this is a river that is classified as a C1 or conservation stream and is actually owned by the state of New Jersey. Anybody who has property on the Ramapo River only owns up to the edge of the river. Because the state owns the river and is classified as a conservation water source, no one can access, use, or own the water or any part of the river. Your property ends at the border. This is way more than you need to know. All you have to do is remember these definitions pretty much, and you're good to go for the test. But I thought I'd throw that in. Now, I'm going to say, is there any questions? I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions. And I'm asking for it, but go ahead. Is reliction equal to high tide and low tide? No. So are you saying that a person who have a property and have a mobile home on it does not own the property? I did not say that. A property borders a natural stream. The town fabricates a canal for rain runoff. Who owns the canal? Well, that would be a public ownership. And the water rights do not go with the public ownership. It may be a material or resource the community owns together, unless it's for private use. But you're saying the town did it, so therefore it's for public use. The town owns that canal and the water. All right, anybody else with a question? Public ownership? Yes. Okay. Alluvion, one more time. Alluvion is the material being eroded away or accreted, build up on the property. Sand, rocks, gravel, stuff like that. And was there any other questions before I'm ready to move on? Guys, the definitions are right in your book. I shouldn't have to keep talking about definitions. Definitions for reliction on page 86. Reliction is the creation of dry land by the gradual withdrawal of water from the land by the lowering of its surface level. She experiences high tides when the water covers her entire backyard. I don't know what you're talking about. Dinesha, can you give me some context for what you're referring to? Okay, well, I'm not gonna, my mom, hang on, let me scroll up. My mom bought a house in Fairfield and the Passaic River's in her backyard. Will that be a riparian right? Yes. Okay, not seeing any more questions. Let's move on. All right. Now, there's only two types of property. There's real property, real estate, and there's personal property. There is no other kind of property. We already described what real estate is. It's the land, the rights, improvements, the stuff in the ground, the stuff in the air. It's all yours. But then whatever's not real property must be real estate, and whatever's not real property must be personal property. What? It's either real or personal property. There is no other kind of property. So anything that's not real property is called personal property or chattel. They refer to personal property as chattel. Chattel is transferred via a bill of sale, and you get a receipt. Real estate is transferred via a deed, which conveys title rights. What about the trees and the rocks? Well, those are all part of the real estate unless they're an annual planting, meaning the daisies and the pansies you put in the ground in the spring are going to die in the fall and not return. Those are called annuals, and annuals are personal property. But perennials, plants, trees that come back year after year with no help from you, are part of the real property. Crops are an annual planting that do not come back year after year unless someone's tending them or harvesting them and then planting them again the next year. Therefore, crops are considered personal property of the farmer, and they give them a special name called emblements. Emblements for crops. Trees are real property. But I've come across a situation recently where a seller had a potted patio. So I had to ask the question, does that tree come with the property or is it excluded? Oh, that's my personal so-and-so tree. It's not come with the property. I said, then you really should let your realtor know that it's not included so they can tell all the buyers who come to see the property that that's not included. People would automatically see a tree. They would think it's part of the real property because trees are defined as real property. But since it's potted, it's movable, then that would indicate it's personal property. He said, that's a good idea. So he called up his realtor. The realtor made the change in the listing. So understand, guys, sometimes real property may not be real property. And personal property may not be personal property. That mobile home off its wheels on a concrete pad, real property. But let me also interject this. Property can change characteristics. What? What was real can become personal, and what was personal can become real? Yes. How's that? Let's say you're building a brand new deck, and your contractor goes to the lumber store, gets a ton of lumber, dumps it off in a big pile in your front yard. Well, as the wood sits on your yard in a big pile, that's personal property. But once it's cut, installed, glued and screwed, whatever, to the foundation, to the side of the house, that is now permanently attached to the house and becomes real property. So once that installation is done, that wood is now real property, rather, not personal, real property. So personal property changed characteristics and now became real property. Personal property becomes real property. And the opposite can also hold true. So several months ago, I had some more trees taken down because a couple trees, a An oak tree and a maple tree had grown up very quickly next to my pool and started shading the pool from the sun. I don't want that. So I had the guys come and cut the trees down, but leave the trees so that I could cut them up for firewood, chop them up. It's nice to have a 25-year-old son who comes over and says, Dad, can I help? Yeah, get busy. But anyway, once those trees were severed from the property by cutting them down, and when they were converted into logs for burning, they became personal property. So the act of severance removes a part of the real estate, and then that real estate becomes personal property for some reason. Now there's going to be more questions, so go ahead. Farm animals are also personal property. Correct. If a renter of a house plants trees, personal property. Whoop, hang on. Does it then become part of the real property and they have to leave it there? First of all, if they're planting trees, they better have the landlord's permission, or else the landlord can soak them for all they're worth to get those things removed, cut down, trimmed, whatever. Tenants don't have a right to just put in trees unless the landlord gives you improvement rights in your lease, and we'll talk about that Monday. But if he didn't, then you have to pay to remove those trees because they don't belong on that property, and you don't have a right to create additional real estate for that landowner. So that would be a bad situation to be in, Laura. Let's see, are installed security cameras personal or real? Well, good question, Dennis. We're going to talk about how to test if something's personal or real in a few minutes. So hang on and I'll get right to it. Any other questions before I move on? We're going to talk about fixtures in a few seconds, so just hang on, Amelia. We'll get right there. But was there any other questions about what we have discussed? Not seeing any, then we're going to move on. All right. So fixtures that Amelia wants to know about are personal property that are permanently attached to lands or buildings. And because they're permanently attached, indicates that they are now part of the real property. What? Be very careful here, guys. This is serious stuff to talk about. In listing a property, I asked the seller, that's a beautiful entry foyer chandelier. My goodness, it must have cost a pretty penny. How'd you come by such a gorgeous fixture? Oh, it was a gift as a wedding gift from Aunt May. It's a $10,000 chandelier. It's beautiful. Oh my goodness, very impressive. I must ask, however, are you going to be including that in the sale of the property? Of course not. Well, then we must tell every buyer that that item is not included in the sale. So they know from just looking at the listing and coming to see the property that that dining room chandelier will not be there when they move in. In other words, one of the tests, the legal tests of a fixture to see if it's real property or personal property is number one, the method of what they call annexation or attachment. Is it bolted in, screwed in? Is it hardwired, hard plumbed into the fixture, into the electric grid or plumbing? And if so, the method of attachment would lead me to believe that that's part of the real property. But if it's on wheels and it's just a plug-in unit, that would lead me to believe it's personal property by the method of annexation or attachment. However, that's just 1 out of 4 tests, the method of annexation. How else can I tell if something's personal or real? The adaptation of that article to the real estate. A hot tub on the back deck that's screwed into a hose connector and plugged into an electrical outlet is personal property. But if a hot tub is installed in a back deck and they build another deck around it to encompass it, hard wire and hard plumb into the electric and the plumbing, then guess what? That's not part of the real estate, because it's not only its method of annexation, but its adaptation of that article to the real estate itself. A deck was built around it and everything else was done custom for it. 2 tests now tell me that that hot tub is part of the real property. But there's still 2 more tests. First of all, let's take a situation where a tenant, as the situation became very quickly apparent, someone plants trees on a property who is a tenant. Well, first of all, they don't have the right to do that. The lease would specify the improvement rights of the tenant if they have any at all. Normally, leases say tenants do not have the right to improve the property, meaning then they're not allowed to attach things in a permanent way like bolting, screwing, etc., into the walls or ceilings and gluing down. You can't do that. So what's a situation then that happens when a tenant decides to put up a bunch of shelving in their apartment, unbeknownst to the landlord? And when that tenant's getting to move out, the landlord comes and does an inspection and says, those are interesting shelving units. Yeah, I'll be removing them before I leave. No, you can't. Why not? Because they became part of the real property when you installed them. But I intend to take them when I leave. No, you can't. Why not? Because they're now part of the real property. What? The method of attachment, the adaptation of the article to the wall, 2 tests tell me that shelf is part of the real property. But the relationship between the parties could go a long way to alleviate any misunderstanding. The tenant should have said to the landlord, I'd like to have the right to put up shelves in the apartment. The landlord then would say yes or no. And if he said yes, then he would have to instruct him what happens to the improvements when the lease is over. In this case, since the tenant does not have rights to improve, whatever improvements the tenant does now become part of the real property, and the landlord can say you can't remove them. And the tenant can't complain because that's the law. Tenants don't know the law. They just assume that I put it up, I can take it down. Not necessarily. So the relationship between the parties, especially when it comes to tenant fixtures, very serious issue. Always check with the landlord to see if something's okay to do. If he says no, they can't do it. It's that simple, guys. If he says yes, then you should have an agreement, an amendment to the your lease contract that states what happens to that improvement at the end of the lease term. But there's still one more test. And that's the intention of the parties. So when I went into that house and said, that's a beautiful chandelier, is it included? They say no, then I must write out a statement. Seller will not include the entry foyer chandelier in the sale of the property. In other words, the seller is stating their intentions in the listing so that when anybody ever comes to see the property, they automatically know that that chandelier is not included in the sale. It's personal property. Therefore, the test of intention overweighs all other 3 tests to see if a fixture is legal, is legally a fixture or not. So we talked about personal property permanently being attached to land or buildings. We talked about tenant fixtures and the relationship of the parties, whether it's allowable or not. We talked about the 4 tests of properties. What we haven't talked about then is trade fixtures. So let me talk about trade fixtures. Trade fixtures are what a business uses in its practice of its business. So you can tell I must go to a very expensive hair salon, right? Look at that cut, baby. Yeah. No, I don't. I take a number 2 and I go out back and I'm zip, zip, and I'm done. Very, very easy that way. But what if I had a manicured hairstyle? I'd go to a salon. I'd walk into the reception area, register who I am, sit down in the guest area, maybe read a magazine, watch some TV or whatever. There's a display case with product in it. And then they call my name, and I go back and I sit in those big comfy chairs, right? They put a towel over me, and then there's a station in front of me with a mirror so I can see my pretty face as they're cutting my hair. They got some storage cabinets and drawers and stuff where all the material that the hairstylist uses are stored in there. And then when I'm done, they put a nice big, not hot, warm towel around my face. They go sit down. They sent me back so they wash my hair out and get all the follicles cleaned up, and now I'm spiffy clean and everything. And geez, it could be time for a mani and pedi, so they'll sit me down in those big luxury chairs and do me up. Everything I just talked about, the reception station, the chairs, the TVs, the magazines, the display case, the cutting chairs, the cutting station, the washing station, the chairs, the hair, the manicure and pedicure chairs and stations, those are all trade fixtures. And trade fixtures are personal property of the business owner. They're called key items. Trade fixtures, when sold with the business, had great value to the business. So if I wanted to sell the hair cutting, the salon, the business, and a buyer says, I'm going to buy it and I want all the trade fixtures because I just want a turnkey operation, meaning all I do is slip the key in the door, turn it, and everything's there. I can work. So those personal property items called trade fixtures are also known as key items, and the buyer pays key money to get those trade fixtures included in the sale. Now, real quick, personal property that is permanently attached to the land or the building is part of the real property, unless intentions of the parties are made known prior to seeing or showing the property. Then the buyer would know whether it is or not intended to stay with the property. Tenant fixtures can only be installed if a landlord gives permission, called improvement rights. And trade fixtures belong to the business owner and are considered personal property. Now, is there any follow-up questions to what we discussed? Did I answer your question, Amelia? What about fixtures? Hopefully I did. Cool. Anybody else with a question? So Kira and Sherry, you guys asking, oh, there's a big question. I got to see that. Let's see. If an owner has a second fridge and the sales agent posts that all appliances are included, is that including the second fridge? If it says all appliances, then all appliances. If it says all appliances, then it means all appliances, Dinesha. So what happens if the landlord verbally agrees you can make a change but is not in the leasing agreement? Then you better write up an agreement to cover your anterior. You don't want questions later. You want a written document that everybody agreed to. So the seller's intention overrides any other legal test for real property. Correct, Savannah. Can you explain method of annexation? Meaning, how is it attached to the property? Method of annexation is actually on page 88. In the middle of the thing, it says tenant and trade fixture. I'm sorry, on the bottom of the page, it says legal test of fixtures. And it's the second item, the annexation of the item, meaning how it's attached to the property. If fixtures are advised and taken down by owner in sales, does the seller need to put up another fixture in its place? Oh, if I would say, okay, so if you're is advertised, the fix, I'm guessing you're asking is advertised. You can't leave the electrical connections bare sparking as it sits. You have to put some sort of light fixture, even if it's just, a screw and light bulb fixture. You have to leave the owner something to use. If you just hardwire hot tub but no deck around it, is it real or personal property? What's the intention here, Laura? Do you intend to leave it as personal property or take it as personal property? If you plan on leaving it as real property, then your intentions would say it's now being part of the real property, or I'm taking it. So it doesn't matter, tell you the truth, Whether it's just temporarily installed or not, the question is, what are your intentions? And did you make them known? That's an accurate statement. Some properties are staged, but I don't see how that applies here. Anybody else with a question before we try to wrap up this chapter? And we're really just about there. Dinesha, did you have a question? I see your dialogue bar open. Oh, maybe not. Okay, let's finish up the chapter, guys. So we just talked about what is real property and how to differentiate between real and personal property. We talked about the rights of ownership. We talked about the land and everything that goes with it. The man-made improvements are part of the real estate. You get the rights of subsurface material like oil, coal, gas, whatever's in the ground. Water rights if there's in there. Air rights above the property. We talked about annual and perennial plantings, and that annual plantings are personal properties where perennial plantings are part of the real estate. We talked about fixtures, both tenant fixtures, trade fixtures, and fixtures in a house, and how to determine what's personal and what's real. And we talked all about those water rights too. So, finishing this chapter, let's do the review questions at the end of the chapter. Give me a second while I pull this up. There's chapter number Flipper 5. Where are you? There you are. So here we go. Question number 1. Which of the following is included in the traditional bundle of rights? Hoping for a few more responses, but if that's it, from those who did respond, 90% of you got it correct. B for boy, use the property for any legal purpose. Yes. Number 2, which of the following is included in the definition of real estate? And unfortunately, Dearborn did it again. They gave 2 correct answers in a question. Which of the following is included in the definition of real estate? Trees are, and so are minerals in the earth. Unfortunately, guys, Dearborn screwed up and gave you 2 correct answers for 1 question. So if you answered C or D, you're right. That's a sad. They should be doing much better editing on their documents before they give it to us. Number 3, a specific tract of land is known as, and I didn't say it, but it's in the first, first page or so of your definition of what's real estate. A specific tract of land is known as And from those who did respond, again, much less than 50% of people attending the class, and I was hoping more people would participate, but from those who did respond, 82% of you correctly answered B for boy. It's called a parcel. Each individual tract of land is known as a parcel. Number 4, the owner of a large farm may lease, again a typo, to a gas drilling company his Oh, that's what everybody looks like. Oop. The owner of a large farm may lease to a gas drilling company his 89% of you correctly answered subsurface rights. B for boy. Good. Guys are getting it. Number 5. Manufactured permanent additions to land are called manufactured permanent additions to land are called 78% of you correctly answered C, improvements. Yes. Number 6, one would have to look at a federal map to identify one would have to look at a federal map to identify navigable waterways. 80% of you correctly answered that. Very good. C. Number 7. Geez, someone asked this question before. A person owns land along the Passaic River. As a result, this person may possess certain and 95%, good job, got it correct. A, riparian rights. Very good. Number 8, which of the following items would be considered personal property? 90% of you got farm equipment correct as well. C is correct. Farm equipment is not real property. Number 9, a tenant in a small house is under a 1-year lease. Without consulting his landlord, the tenant installed awnings over the building front windows to keep the sun away from some delicate hanging plants. Which of the following is true? And from those responding, 80% got C correct. The awnings have become part of the real estate and cannot be removed. Yes. Number 10, when furnishing a beauty salon, the hairdresser installed 3 shampoo basins, 4 large plate glass mirrors, and a custom workstation counters. Just before the expiration of the lease, the hairdresser has the right to remove actually, in this definition, they're calling the fact that these shampoo basins are permanently installed and hooked up to the plumbing a part of the real estate. by definition, it's still a trade fixture. So A is correct, but shampoo basin should also be. See, this is the one reason I personally don't like Dearborn, because they're not very good about checking their information and the spelling checks and everything else that go with it. It's just terrible to see this stuff presented to us this way. The answer is this, guys. Everything that is mentioned above is a trade fixture. Nothing is eliminated. Everything is a trade fixture. So unfortunately, I don't have a correct answer for you on this because it's incorrect as laid out in the answers. They're coming out with a brand new edition sometime in May or June again for another addition to this, because obviously there's too many people are complaining about the bad quality of quality control. But let's move on. Let's not dwell on the negatives. Number 11, the owners are building a new enclosed front porch in their home. The lumber dealer with whom they are contracting has just unloaded a truckload of lumber to be used to build the porch in front of their house. At this point, the lumber is considered And from those who responded, 2 out of 3 of you, 67% correctly answered A, chattel. It's personal property. So number 12 then, when the new porch is completed, the lumber that the dealer originally delivered will now be considered what? And from those responding, 85% correctly answered B for boy. It's now considered real estate. Yes. 13. Personal property differs from real property in its and the answer, of which about 80% of you correctly identified, was B, mobility. Is it permanently attached? Is it on wheels? Mobility. 14. A functioning furnace in the basement of a home would be considered a > 95% of you correctly answered B, fixture. Good for you. Number 15, courts apply 4 basic tests to determine whether an item is a fixture or personal property. These include all of the following, except And 83% of you correctly identified D as the correct answer. The opinion of the person purchasing real estate. First of all, opinions are worth nothing. So it is not a test of a legal fixture. Number 17, after a railroad sells air rights for construction of a building over its tracks, trains usually can. And if you're wondering about air rights and railroads, think about Grand Central Station. Above Grand Central is the now MetLife building, used to be known as the Pan Am building. How'd the Port Authority let someone, the Pan Am, build over top? They sold their air rights, and Pan Am built a building over the top of the Grand Central Station. Now that building is owned by MetLife. So you can sell or lease your air rights. Just like mineral rights and water rights, you can sell or lease them. So after a railroad sells rights for construction of a building over its tracks, trains usually can. And the answer in this case, of which 3 out of 4, you about 74% correctly answered, was A, operate normally. Number 17, a ranch owner owns land on which oil is discovered by a drilling company. Based on these facts alone, which of the following statements is true? And 81% of you, I'll give it to you, 81% of you answered correctly A. If the owner has not previously conveyed the mineral rights, he owns the oil. Yeah. 18, a mobile home can be sold as real estate if it is 96% of us, big thumbs up, got it correct. C, permanently attached to the land by a foundation. Good for you. 19, last couple questions in this chapter for review. The rights of the owner of property along the ocean are known as 88% of you correctly answered C, littoral rights. Correct. Very good. And finally, last question for the chapter. Ownership rights to real estate do not include .94% got it correct. D, navigable rivers running through the property. Very good. You guys did real well in this review, by the way. Real good comprehension. So was there any basic follow-up questions to chapter 5